Hey everybody, Jonathan Bailor back with another bonus SANE show. I'm very excited for today's guest. A gentleman I had the pleasure of meeting recently, and a very cool guy with a very cool story, very passionate, and I think you'll enjoy chatting with him today. His name is John Staenberg. He is the founder of Hand of God Wines, and I know we've been getting a lot of questions about how or if alcohol has a role in a sane lifestyle, and I said, who better than John Staenberg to get on the show to chat about this? John, how you doing today?
Fantastic.
Well, John, you right now, your whole life revolves around wines. And before we get into wine and how that can fit or not fit into a healthy lifestyle, we'll have certainly a good chat about that. How did you get into the wine business to begin with?
It sort of took me by surprise and captured me in a way I didn't expect. 8 years ago, I went down to Argentina and just for a vacation. And whenever I travel to a new place, I like to look up classmates or people that I might know, and I happened to look in my Stanford Business School alumni directory and found a guy by the name of Santiago Achaval. And Santiago, it turns out, is an amazing winemaker, and I reached out to him and said, hey, would it be possible to get together and have a glass of wine? I'd love to try your juice and see what you're up to. And he said, sure, come on by. So what was going to be just a trip to Buenos Aires became a trip to Buenos Aires and a trip to Mendoza, which is across the country next to the Andes Mountains. And so the journey started.
Very cool. And so where are you at today in terms of that journey?
Yeah, so, I met Santiago and we had a glass of wine, and then we had 2 glasses of wine, and we had a bottle of wine. And then we sat down for what's called an asado, which is their version of a barbecue. And literally 5 hours later, and I don't remember the number of bottles, we shook hands, and I said, I'll buy some land if you'll make the wine. And so that was 8 years ago. And so we planted back then, and it was fallow land. It was rocks and just dirt. And today we've got a thriving vineyard on it, and we have our first release, our 2010 release. And I'm in the wine business, and it's been quite a journey.
Talk about planting those seeds. You literally planted those seeds and then waited nearly a decade. You've got to have you're just like a pent up, I'm ready to launch this.
Yeah, I used to say 9 months for pregnancy and nothing. With all due respect, it took a long time, but the good news is, because you don't know, is that the juice is really good, and you're on sort of pins and needles because you don't know how it's going to come out. It's a little bit of art, and it's a little bit of science, and it's a little bit of the hand of God.
Well, speaking of science, when it comes to things that are discussed in the media, wine and chocolate, in terms of a health benefits or lack thereof, or, because people like wine and they like chocolate, so if anyone can say anything nice about them, certainly that is good news. So what has been your experience with wine as it relates to good health or poor health?
Yeah, first of all, let me say I'm not a doctor. I think that's important for people to know. But what's fun is, there's this thing called the internet, and you can find out a lot of information quickly and easily. And so, just for fun, I thought I would do a Bing search. Being in Seattle, I had to say that, a Bing search on wine and health, and there are 399 million results.
Oh, well, that proves it right there. Wine is good for you.
Right.
That proves it. Definitive proof.
But it's a fun topic because in 1991, I think, 60 Minutes did a special on sort of the French paradox, right? The French, they eat all this butter, and they're smoking, and they have this unhealthy lifestyle, and yet they're living longer at the time than Americans. And the article was really about red wine. Mm-hmm. And that 60 Minutes segment changed forever, American red wine consumption. It immediately changed overnight because of that. And I think, it's been studied over and over now, and there's clearly something going on there. It mm-hmm. clearly, everything, I think that, if there's a takeaway today, everything in moderation, but it's probably good for you, right? And they're actually not sure, they talk a little bit about resveratrol, if you can say it, and whether or not, the antioxidants and what it does for you and anti-aging and, supposed to be good for, reducing cancer risk and so forth, whether or not that's it, or is it just alcohol in general? But I mean, I think the consensus is, again, a glass or two a day of red wine or some equivalent is probably pretty good for you.
And I think there's a really important thing to tease apart, John, and that's what we mean when we say really good for you. And I know that might sound like what do you mean by the definition of the Bill Clinton style? But,
That's fair.
Some people might say, for example, light cigarettes are a healthy choice. and they are compared to regular cigarettes, right? And I think when we say, when people hear red wine is good for you, do you think it's a fair characterization to say, if you drink alcohol, the healthiest source of alcohol is red wine? But when compared to kale, for example, if you had to choose between eating some kale and drinking some red wine, you might be better off eating that kale.
Or having kale wine.
Is that your next? That's your next crop.
That's
kale
it,
wine.
right? How good is that going to be?
Holy moly!
Don't release this yet. I got to go make some more kale wine.
Well, it's okay. It's going to take 10 years from what it sounds. I'm just kidding.
So yes, I mean certainly. To be honest, I hear what you're saying and distinguishing if you're going to drink alcohol. The truth is, they think that red wine is the one to have. It's not 100% sure.
Okay.
They do think a little bit of alcohol is good for you. I mean, I love this article I read that, the 8 health benefits of drinking wine, right? Longevity, reducing heart attack, lowering heart disease, risk of type 2 diabetes, a lower risk of stroke, cut risk of cataracts, colon cancer, slow brain decline. I don't know, man. That sounds like you should be drinking it.
Well, if you read it on the internet,
it must be true.
It must be true, especially if that company sells ad space for a wine company, then it's definitely true.
Okay, so it did come through Food and Wine magazine.
So no, John, it's actually a very interesting point because we had Professor Gary Wenk on the show, and he studies a lot of chemicals and their impact on the brain and on the body at Ohio State University. Right. And he talked, for example, about how it's very difficult to say, is something good or bad, because there's almost always good components to things. It's the ratio of good to bad. One example he gave is smoking cigarettes. If you look at smoking cigarettes, I know it sounds crazy, but there are some very compelling health benefits to smoking cigarettes. The challenges, well, no, and the challenges though, that there's a ratio there. So
that's right.
I think it's really important though for folks to understand that if they are drinking alcohol, if they like drinking alcohol, what is the healthiest choice for them to choose? So did you see, or have you had any experience, like what is it about red wine versus white wine specifically, or versus?
They think it might be that element, that word that I have a problem saying.
Resveratrol?
Yeah. but they're not sure. But to be honest, they're not sure.
Yep.
Let's be clear. I actually spent some time looking at this, and the consensus, if there is one, sort of suggests 2 glasses of red wine, if you're going to drink alcohol, is probably the best thing. But I got to say, it's not conclusive science at this point. But, I got to tell you,
you may or may not be biased.
Okay, so probably doing this is bad. But a little bit, I'm just saying.
Well, and John, what... I think there's also something to be said. I know you are quite the connoisseur. You take a great deal of pride in your wine. What is the role of the quality of a red wine or a wine in general? Certainly, I'm wondering if a box of wine versus a bottle of your wine would have a different health impact.
That's an interesting question. I mean, look, there's this whole discussion about, I get this asked a lot about organic wines. Mm-hmm. And, I think there is no fixed definition, concrete definition of what that means in the wine industry, or biodynamic. And, just like your fruits and vegetables, you probably don't want to be drinking wines that have been full of pesticides and insecticides and the whole thing. And fortunately, Argentina is in the very fortunate position of not needing to use that stuff very much. France had the great phylloxera problem where they lost all their crops. Argentina just doesn't really, knock on wood, they just don't really have that issue. So we don't use that stuff very much, if at all. And so, that is one thing to consider. I've had people, there's this whole other thing about people getting headaches from some wines and not other wines. And again, we don't have the science on whether there's some additive or not. But what we're doing is pretty free of any of the chemicals you wouldn't want in there, and we're not doing any additives. Some people want to add wood chips in for flavor and add all sugars in and all kinds of things. You can know we're not doing that. I mean, for us, the joy and beauty and the truth, if you will, around wine is all about the fruit expressing itself as it is and as it wants to express itself, not manipulating it. So we believe that the excitement and the art here is about that, is about showing, they talk about terroir, truly expressing of place and of the dirt and where it's coming from. And that's what we're about. So, I can't speak to everybody else from what they're doing, but I can tell you that ours is pretty pure from that standpoint.
John, what I love that you captured there is this focus on quality, because I think that this all really boils down to anything negative that someone wants to say about wine or alcohol or anything like that in general is usually couched in the context of people consuming alcohol in an abusive fashion, which you're not going to do with a high quality wine that you're savoring. The same thing applies to food, right? It's not that you should never eat dessert. It's that if you're going to eat dessert, let's make it worth it. Let's make sure it's a high quality thing and you savor it and you enjoy it and you extract all the goodness you can from it, not just from a nutritional perspective, but from an emotional perspective. And in some ways, people talk about moderation, but if you really savor things, I feel like you may even self-regulate because
100%.
It's almost a spiritual experience.
100%. I mean, it's interesting. I guess I'll say two things about that. One is we named our vineyard something that is a uniquely Argentine Spanish word called sobremesa, which generically means on top of or above the table. But in Argentina, it actually refers to the time after a meal with family and friends where you're sitting around and enjoying each other's company and taking time and not doing email and not doing all those other things and truly taking time with what's in front of you and being present. And I think that what you're saying is absolutely right. How often do you go out and see people chugging or not paying attention? We do dinners here in Seattle at a place called the Vood, which is kind of a pop-up dining club. And before or during the meal, at some point, I tell people, stop, smell the wine, take a moment, stop what you're doing, and actually focus on what's in front of you. Because for me, and I can say this because I didn't make the wine, there's real magic in what that juice is about. And so I think if you do that in any part of your life, it's the mindfulness stuff, right? Yeah. If you do that, then it's not about mass consumption and not, you've lost what it's about for what we're trying to do. I can't speak to others, but what we're trying to do. So
that mindfulness is key, John, because people talk about eat like grandma did and all these different diets and cultural practices that exist around the world, and even the French paradox. But I think one common denominator that we can see around cultures is the further away they move from savoring and honoring that which they put in their body. And the more they turn towards just shovel stuff in, no mindfulness, that seems to be the common denominator of just breakdown in physical health. So it's less about like, can I ever drink wine or this nuance or that? It's like, look, if you take a mindful, quality-focused approach to what you put into your body, it's going to be pretty tough for you to achieve anything other than some pretty good results, it seems.
Yeah, it's funny. I think about people going into a grocery store and the terrible experience of having to choose a bottle of wine. And it's overwhelming, right? And it almost becomes, gosh, I'm just going to pick something that the price point is cheap and the label's cute, and I'm not going to think about what that wine's about. And what we want to do is we want to create some storytelling and some connection to a place. And that's all part of the same thing. It's all part of that mindfulness. It's all part of saying, what's this thing about? What am I putting into my body? And so I love what you're doing because it totally relates and directly relates to how we think about the experience of wine.
Oh, well, thanks, John. And I think that lesson that you just said, that what is the story behind this? I would urge everyone who's watching and listening to this to think about that story, because you will see, for a great example is dairy. Not to, I eat certain dairy products that are sane, but you'll almost see dairy products presented as if they're telling one story, which is this happy farm where cows are running around on the grass and everyone's smiling. And if you actually understood the story of how that got on the shelf, you would never put it in your body, and you would definitely not ever give it to your kids. So really also thinking about the story about what's on your plate and what's in your glass, John, I think that's really empowering for people.
And just if we can take it one step even further, come to Argentina. Come walk the vineyard with me. I'm quite serious. And about every other day, I get a request from someone, hey, I've got this friend going to Argentina. They want to visit your place. They want to drink your wine. That's part of it. And I truly, any of your listeners who are going, would love to give them tips and tricks and introductions and suggestions. So I'm sincere, and you happy to give out my email, and we'll do that for them.
I appreciate that, John. Well, on that note, where can folks go to learn more about you and about Hand of God Wines?
As you might expect, the internet has a place called handofgodwines.com.
Excellent.
So, and I'm just John at handofgodwines.com. So if anyone wants to reach out, I'm here. But we'd love to connect with you, even if it's just questions or thoughts. We'd love to connect with you.
I love it. Well, folks, check out handofgodwines.com. Our wonderful guest today was the always delightful John Staenberg. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, buddy. I loved it.
Listeners and viewers, I hope you enjoyed this chat as much as I did. Such great takeaways. What is the story behind what you're putting in your body? And again, if you can have that focus on consciousness and that focus on quality, man, things get a lot simpler and a lot more enjoyable. So tough to beat that. Anyway, have a great day, and remember, stay sane.